What would you do if the person you loved most became the one who hurt you the deepest? My name is Eleanor Walsh, and I never imagined that one day I would be fighting not just for my dignity, but for my freedom. This is not an easy story to share. But if you're watching, stay with me. And before we go any further, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. For most of my life, I believed growing old would be gentle. Quiet afternoons with tea, birds singing in the backyard, and finally finishing the books I never had time to read. What I never expected was that growing old would feel like slowly disappearing, erased one decision at a time. I'm an elderly woman, and until a few months ago, I lived alone in the home my husband Richard and I built together in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon. Every flower in the front yard held a memory. The kitchen still carried the scent of his morning coffee. That house was my life. I wasn't ready to leave it. I didn't need to leave it. One evening I slipped on a small throw rug in the living room. It wasn't serious, just a few bruises. I was still sharp, still walking, still myself. But that single fall became all the excuse my son, Daniel, needed. He arrived early the next morning with a look I didn't recognize. Cold, distant, almost clinical. He didn't ask how I was feeling. Instead, he opened a briefcase and spoke like he was running a meeting. "Mom, we found a really good facility. It's time. This is best for everyone." I laughed at first, thinking he must be joking. But he didn't smile. "I'm not going anywhere," I told him. "This is my home. I'm fine." He had already made the arrangements. My belongings were packed. The paperwork was signed. I stood frozen in the hallway as strangers carried my boxes out. My chest tightened that I could barely breathe. I tried to argue, to protest, but the way he looked at me, like I was a problem to be solved, made the words die in my throat. "You fell," he said calmly. "You could have broken your hip. You live alone. It's too dangerous. And honestly, I don't have the time to keep checking on you." There was no cruelty in his voice, only efficiency. Somehow that hurt even more. They took me away in a van. I wasn't even allowed to ride with him. As we pulled away, a deep silence settled inside me. The kind that seeps into your bones when you realize everything familiar is slipping away. The facility was clean and modern, filled with neutral colors and large windows. But beneath the smell of bleach was something else. Abandonment. A silence you can't explain unless you've lived inside it. I sat on the edge of a narrow bed in a room that wasn't mine. My name was taped to the door like a label on a package. I waited for Daniel to say something. An apology, reassurance, anything. But all he said was, "I'll check in later this week. You'll be comfortable here." Then he left. I didn't cry right away. I just looked around. Bare walls. One suitcase. A lifetime reduced to what I could carry. I wasn't old enough to forget, but I was old enough to be forgotten. That night, I lay awake listening to the hum of fluorescent lights in the hallway. I thought of Richard, how we used to promise we'd always take care of each other. He was gone now, and my own son had put me away like I no longer mattered. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. Something stirred inside me that night. Not anger, not grief, but something quieter. Defiance. They believed my life was over. They had no idea I was just beginning to plan. Morning came with the sound of carts rolling through the hallway and distant coughing from neighboring rooms. The air smelled of overcooked eggs and weak coffee. Time itself felt sedated that I dressed slowly, deliberately. Every movement reminded me I still had control over something. In the common area, staff offered polite nods and practiced smiles. Nothing personal, just routine. Residents stared blankly at televisions or slept in their chairs. No one asked my name. I felt invisible, even while standing in plain sight. I sat by a window. Outside, a squirrel ran freely along a fence and paused to look in. For a moment I envied it. No permission needed. No forms to sign. Daniel didn't call. Not that day. Not the next. On the fourth day he finally arrived, shirt neatly tucked, straight from work. He sat across from me without meeting my eyes and handed me a stack of papers. "Insurance documents," he said. "And some photos for your nightstand." There were only 3. One of him as a child. One of Richard holding him as a baby. And one of me, cropped out of a family photo barely included. "Do you need anything?" he asked, his voice polite but impatient. I wanted to ask him why. Why this was easier than caring. Why I had become so disposable. But I already knew the answer. So I stayed quiet. You're very quiet, he said. I'm thinking, I replied. For the first time he looked uncomfortable. And in that moment I knew this story was far from over. Then he said something I will never forget. It's not that I don't care, Mom. You've had your time. Now let me handle things. Had my time. As if life comes with an expiration date. As if I had nothing left to feel, to give, or to live for. 10 minutes later he was gone. No hug. No I love you. Just a quiet exit, like he had checked off a task on his list. The days that followed blurred together. Meals served at fixed hours. Bingo games with prizes no one truly wanted. I smiled at other residents, but most were lost in their own silence. Some were so far gone they couldn't even remember their names. That's when I understood the cruelest thing about this place. It wasn't the boredom. It was the erasure. They didn't just take away our independence. They stripped away our identity. No one here knew I had once been a librarian. That I played the piano for Richard every Sunday morning. That I baked pies from scratch. That I had read every Steinbeck novel twice. Here I was just a room number. Fall risk. Another old woman whose time was considered finished. Until one afternoon, a nurse I hadn't seen before stepped into my room. She carried a clipboard and a soft smile. Her hair was neatly pulled back, her scrubs clean. But her eyes were tired in a way only someone who had carried too much for too long could recognize. Mrs. Walsh, she asked gently. Hi, I'm Marissa. I'll be checking in on you this week. I nodded. She sat down, not keeping the usual distance the staff maintained. Is there anything you'd like me to know about you? The question caught me off guard. No one had asked me that since I arrived. I hesitated, then said quietly, I like crossword puzzles. I make a mean lemon meringue pie. And I still remember the smell of my husband's shaving cream. Marissa smiled. That's wonderful. I'd like to know more. And just like that, something shifted. She wasn't like the others. She wasn't pretending. She saw me. She came back the next day. And the next. We talked. We laughed. She brought me tea from the break room when the dining hall ran out. She called me Eleanor instead of Mrs. Walsh. She remembered my favorite singer from the 1970s. She told me about her life, her daughter, her long shifts, her exhaustion. She never complained, but her voice carried the weight of someone who had learned to survive quietly, slowly. She became the only reason I didn't feel completely invisible. I still missed my home. I still missed Richard. And the betrayal still hurt. But for the first time since being forced into that place, I wasn't just waiting to disappear. I was watching, listening, learning. Learning who still saw me and who never truly had. Because somewhere in that silence I began to understand something important. This wasn't just a nursing home. It was the stage for a battle I didn't yet know I was about to fight. I started noticing small details. The way some staff knocked twice before entering. The way certain residents stared into nothing. Their stories trapped behind tired eyes. The way people stopped asking questions once they decided you were just old. But with Marissa it was different. She saw past the wrinkles, past the medication schedules, past the chart taped to my door. She listened, not with pity but with respect. Every morning, no matter how busy she was, she found time to check in. Morning, Eleanor. You doing okay today? Those few words gave my day meaning. 2 weeks passed without a visit from Daniel. My phone remained silent. No calls. No messages. No concern. And there I was sharing stories with a nurse half my age, like she was the only family I had left. Marissa had a warm, genuine laugh, the kind that surprised me sometimes. She told me about her 6-year-old daughter, Mia, who loved peanut butter sandwiches and refused to sleep without the hallway light on. She says it keeps the nightmares away, Marissa said one evening as we sat near the small garden behind the center. Smart girl, I smiled. Smarter than me most days, she replied. But her voice cracked slightly as she looked away. I noticed her hands then, slightly calloused, nails kept short. The hands of someone who had to do everything herself. Later, she told me her mother had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's 2 years earlier. Marissa had been only 29. She worked 2 jobs, moved her mother into her small apartment because she couldn't afford a facility. And your husband? I asked softly. She smiled, but it was empty. He left, she said. When I told him I wouldn't put my mom in a home, he said he wasn't ready to carry that kind of weight. That kind of weight. I understood it too well. That night, lying alone in my bed, I thought about Marissa. Her quiet strength. The way she still showed up every day. And then I thought about Daniel, how little he seemed to understand about loyalty, love, or weight at all. The contrast was unbearable. The next morning after breakfast, I looked at Marissa and said calmly, "Could you help me find my lawyer's phone number?" She blinked, clearly surprised, but she didn't question me. She simply nodded. "Of course," she said gently. "I'll bring you a phone and find a quiet place where you can make the call." I could tell from her eyes. She didn't want to intrude, but she sensed something important was unfolding. The call took less than 5 minutes. My lawyer, James Palmer, had been our family attorney for years. He recognized my voice immediately. "I need to make changes to my will," I told him calmly. "And I'd like to begin paperwork for an adult adoption." There was a pause. "Eleanor, are you sure?" "I've never been more certain." That same afternoon I wrote 2 letters. One was for Daniel, short, factual, and cold. No emotion. No explanations. The second letter was for Marissa. That one I sealed carefully and tucked into the drawer of my nightstand. I wasn't ready to give it to her yet. But when the time came, I wanted her to know the truth. That she wasn't just a nurse to me. She was family. That I didn't tell her that day. Or the next. We kept our routine, talking about books, Mia's spelling homework, the weather outside the windows. But something inside me had shifted. I was no longer a passive observer waiting to fade away. I had purpose again. Quiet mission. A legacy to rewrite. Because if Daniel believed he could decide the ending of my story without even asking me, he was about to learn how wrong he was. And I wouldn't need to raise my voice to teach him. It was early October when the trees outside the facility turned a deep rust-colored red. One morning I watched the leaves fall slowly, like paper memories drifting to the ground. It reminded me how my own life had been slipping away piece by piece, unnoticed by everyone except Marissa. That day she brought me a cup of chamomile tea. Real chamomile. Not the powdered kind. "I thought of you," she said softly. "Smells like something you'd like." And it did. It smelled like my old kitchen. Like Sunday mornings with Richard reading the newspaper while I baked cinnamon rolls. We sat by the window in comfortable silence, watching the trees. She looked more tired than usual, yet she still carried that calm steadiness, that quiet grace that was Marissa's gift. No matter what storm she was carrying, she made you feel like you mattered in that moment. She told me Mia had been sick the night before. Fever. Sore throat. She'd stayed up all night rubbing her daughter's back, holding her small hand, whispering comfort. "It's nothing serious," she said. "Just a virus." But I heard the exhaustion beneath her words. The fear that comes from doing everything alone. "Do you ever get a break?" I asked. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'll rest when she's grown," she said. "Right now she needs me." Something clicked inside me then. It wasn't just admiration. It was recognition. I saw myself in her. The younger me, rocking Daniel through sleepless nights. The woman who sacrificed weekends, promotions, and rest for her family. The difference was this. I did all that and ended up forgotten. Marissa deserved better. Later that day I called James again. I finalized the amendment to my will. Half of my estate, the house, my savings, and remaining investments, would go to Marissa Carter. No announcement. No drama. Just a quiet legal promise. For the first time since Richard died, I felt like I was doing something that truly mattered. In the days that followed, I began keeping a journal. A real one, leather-bound, its pages smelling faintly of old bookstores. I wrote letters to Marissa. To Mia. Even one to myself. I poured out my memories, my regrets, the sting of betrayal still echoing in Daniel's words. "You've had your time." Each sentence felt like stitching a wound closed. One evening, I invited Marissa to sit with me in the small garden behind the facility. The air was cool, the sun dipping low behind the trees. I handed her a small envelope. She blinked. "What's this?" "Not for now," I said gently. "For when it matters." She studied my face. "You're not sick, are you?" I laughed softly. "No, dear. I'm just awake now." We sat quietly, our shoulders almost touching. I don't think she realized the magnitude of that moment, that I had rewritten my legacy, not out of anger but out of clarity. Because sometimes the people who share your blood aren't the ones who carry your heart. As the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, I made peace with something important. If Daniel had chosen to give me up, then I had every right to give myself forward, to someone who saw me, who valued me, who stayed. I didn't know then how quickly everything would begin to unravel. But I felt it. A storm was coming. And for the first time in a long while I was ready to stand in the rain. It was well past midnight when I woke to the sound of muffled voices in the hallway. Most nights the facility sank into silence after lights out. Residents tucked away like forgotten books on dusty shelves. But this night was different. I slipped out of bed, wrapped a shawl around my shoulders, and opened my door just enough to peer into the softly lit hallway. At the far end, near the administrator's office, I saw Daniel. I froze. He was supposed to be out of town. He hadn't visited in weeks. And yet there he was, standing at the far end of the hallway, tense, his hands cutting sharply through the air as he spoke to a man in a gray suit I didn't recognize. Their voices were low, careful, but one sentence drifted down the hallway like smoke. If she changes, that will, I lose everything. I stepped back into the shadows. The other man, there was no doubt now he was a lawyer, sighed. It's her legal right, Daniel. You can't stop her. She's not thinking clearly, Daniel snapped. She's alone. Confused. Probably being manipulated by some staff member. My blood ran cold. He was talking about Marissa. I want a psychological evaluation, he said sharply. Something official. If she's declared incompetent, the will can't be changed. I couldn't breathe. My heart slammed so loudly in my chest I was sure they could hear it. I'm not going to let her hand over my inheritance to some nurse, he hissed. She owes me. Owes him. He truly believed that my life, my savings, my home, everything I had built, belonged to him by default. That biology entitled him to the sum of my existence. The lawyer hesitated. Are you sure you want to go down this road? Daniel didn't pause. Do it. I backed away silently, returned to my room, and closed the door as gently as I could. I sat on the edge of the bed, trembling. I didn't know what hurt more, what I had overheard, or the fact that deep down I wasn't surprised. Daniel had always been calculated, strategic. But now the truth stood bare. He didn't care about my well-being, that he cared about control. And that's when something else struck me, hard and sudden. Richard. The night he died had always felt wrong. Too sudden. He'd been working late in his office, reviewing financial records, while I was visiting a friend. By the time I got home, he was already gone. A heart attack, they said. No one around to help. I remembered asking Daniel if he'd spoken to his father that day. He had said no. But now I wasn't sure. The next morning I acted as if nothing had changed. Daniel didn't know I'd heard anything. He smiled thinly, handed me a box of herbal teas I hadn't asked for and said, "Thought you'd like these." I nodded. Pretended. That afternoon I asked one of the newer aides, a timid young woman named Hannah, if she could tell me who had been working the front desk the night before. She hesitated, then whispered, "It was Kristen, but she doesn't talk much." I found Kristen folding laundry in a quiet back hallway. I waited until no one else was around. "I need to ask you something, off the record." She looked startled but nodded. "You saw my son here last night, didn't you?" She paused, then slowly nodded again. "And he wasn't visiting me, was he?" She swallowed. "No. He was in the office for a long time. Arguing." "Did you hear anything?" I asked softly. Her voice dropped. "Just bits. Something about paperwork. And getting someone declared unfit." I thanked her and walked away, the weight of it pressing down on my chest like lead. Back in my room, I stared at the photograph Daniel had left weeks ago. A smiling boy in a Little League uniform. The child I rocked through thunderstorms. The teenager I forgave when he lied about his grades. The man I defended even when Richard warned me he was growing selfish, cold. I had loved him without condition. But now I saw the truth. That love had always been one-sided. Then the memories came rushing back, sharp, relentless. Richard's phone call that day. Daniel arriving late to the hospital, eyes dry, movements unhurried. The strange silence afterward. I didn't want to finish the thought, but I already knew. He hadn't helped his father, not because he couldn't but because he wouldn't. Richard's death spared him from facing the financial mess, the company debt Daniel himself had helped create. And now he was coming for me. But I wasn't Richard. And I wasn't going to disappear quietly. I reached into my drawer and pulled out the envelope, the letter I had written to Marissa. It was time. Because war had been declared. And I had no intention of losing. It happened faster than I ever imagined. One moment, Marissa and I were sitting in the garden, watching the wind scatter leaves across the path like whispers from another life. The next, I was told to pack my things. But this time, I wasn't being moved to another room, or another wing. I was being transferred to a psychiatric unit. The nurse delivering the message was new, polite, distant, mechanical. She spoke like she was reading from a script. Mrs. Walsh, the attending physician, has recommended a transfer for observation. Just a few days to ensure your safety. Safety from what? I asked. She blinked. There have been concerns, confusion, unusual conversations, possible signs of delusion. I laughed. Short. Sharp. You mean realizing my son is a vulture? She didn't respond. 10 minutes later, 2 orderlies arrived with a wheelchair. I told them I didn't need it. They said it was protocol. I didn't resist. Not because I accepted it, but because I understood the trap. If I raised my voice, I'd be labeled unstable. If I refused, it would be proof. So I stayed calm. They wheeled me down a hallway I'd never noticed before. Through a locked door. A security code I didn't have. When it clicked shut behind me, something deep inside me cracked. The air was different here. Sterile. Heavy. Thicker. The walls were painted a dull, lifeless green. Less like a hospital, more like a holding cell. There were no photographs. No music. Only the low hum of despair hanging in the air. My new room was smaller. The bed was bolted to the floor. A single window sealed with safety glass. No sharp objects. No phone. No Marissa. I asked the nurse, a woman with tired eyes and her hair pulled into a tight bun, how long I would be kept there. Until the evaluation is complete, she said. And who ordered it? I asked. She hesitated. Just long enough to confirm what I already knew. Your son made the request, she said finally, with a supporting statement from Dr. Levon. Dr. Levon, the facility's medical director. A man I had spoken to only a handful of times. A man I had never trusted. Never confided in. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the wall, forcing myself to breathe as a slow fire rose in my chest. So this was Daniel's next move. He couldn't undo the will on his own. But if I were declared mentally unfit, legally incompetent, everything I had fought to protect could be erased. My voice silenced. My freedom taken. Locked away. The first night in that room was the longest night of my life. I didn't sleep. I barely moved. The lights outside my door stayed on all night, spilling through the gap beneath it like a constant interrogation. They brought me pills. I refused them. They said I needed rest. That I was agitated. I wasn't agitated. I was aware. I thought of Richard, alone in his office, clutching his chest, dialing the number of the one person he believed would save him. And I thought of Daniel seeing the call, and choosing not to answer. I cried that night. Not from fear but from clarity. I wasn't his mother anymore. I was an obstacle. Then I thought of Marissa. Her hands. Her laugh. Her quiet strength. And I knew, she wouldn't let this disappear. The next day a social worker came in. His name was Kevin. Young. Polite. Clipboard in hand. I'm here to talk, Mrs. Walsh, he said softly. Just routine questions. Don't waste your breath, I replied. You're not here for me. You're here to validate paperwork. He blinked. That's not true. Then let me make a phone call. He hesitated. That's not permitted without physician approval. I stared at him. So much for rights. He left 15 minutes later, visibly shaken. I hadn't given them what they wanted. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't break. I told the truth calmly, clearly, coldly. They wanted instability. I gave them composure. That evening, while I pretended to sleep, I heard voices outside my door. She's lucid, one nurse whispered. Honestly, more coherent than half the staff. Orders are orders, another replied. Hope flickered. Not everyone was blind. Still I was trapped, and time was running out. But Daniel had underestimated something. He had underestimated her. The first time Marissa tried to see me after I was transferred, they turned her away. She told me later how she had rushed in during her shift, still in her scrubs, her badge swinging, her heart pounding harder than she'd ever admit. She asked where I'd been moved. The answer was cold and final. Mrs. Walsh is no longer under your care. The matter is being handled internally. She said. Her hands began to shake. She wanted to scream, but she didn't. Marissa was smart. She knew the game. What she didn't yet know was how deep Daniel's reach went. So she started digging. She wasn't just a nurse anymore. She was on a mission. She called my lawyer, James Palmer, and demanded a meeting. When he hesitated, she sent him the letter I had written weeks earlier, the one I had sealed and hidden in my drawer like a seed, praying it would grow when the time was right. That letter changed everything. James called her back within an hour. They met the next morning. No pleasantries. No small talk. Marissa told him everything. About the will, the sudden pressure from Daniel, the way I was declared unstable without warning. Then she gave him something else. A recording. 2 weeks earlier, Daniel had been speaking near the nurse's station with the facility administrator. He hadn't noticed Marissa's phone in her coat pocket. He hadn't known she'd accidentally hit record. His voice was unmistakable. She's lonely. Easy to manipulate, he said. That nurse is conning her. Once I have her declared unfit, the will goes back to how it should be. That audio alone was enough to raise alarms. But Marissa didn't stop there. She tracked down Kristen, the night shift nurse who had seen Daniel at the facility after hours. Kristen was afraid. Afraid of losing her job. Marissa told her the truth. If you stay silent, you're complicit. Kristen signed a statement. Then came the medical records. Marissa noticed inconsistencies. Dates that didn't match. Quotes attributed to me that I never said. Notes claiming I'd been non-compliant with medication I had never refused before the transfer. Together, Marissa and James compiled everything. Statements. Recordings. Medical discrepancies. They filed for an emergency hearing. They called it what it was. Elder abuse. While all of this unfolded outside those walls, I remained inside, pacing my room like a caged animal. Every day they offered pills. Every day I refused. My chart filled with words like uncooperative and defensive. But I knew the truth. They wanted me numb. They wanted me quiet. They wanted me erased. I didn't know what Marissa was doing. I couldn't see it. I couldn't feel it. But I believed in her. Because she was the only person in that building who had ever looked at me and seen a human being. Not a patient. Not a burden. Not a bank account. Then one morning they told me I had a hearing scheduled with the judge. I knew then she had broken through. They let me shower that morning. Gave me clean clothes. Offered coffee I didn't trust. A nurse brushed my hair, trying to make me look presentable. But appearances didn't matter anymore. I wasn't preparing to plead. I was preparing for war. And when I walked into that courtroom, I wasn't a victim. I was a woman with nothing left to lose. And everything left to say. They took me to the courthouse in a van with darkened windows, as if I were dangerous. 2 attendants sat up front, casually discussing what they planned to eat for lunch, while I sat in the back, hands folded neatly in my lap, pretending not to listen. But I heard every word. I heard how they talked about me. The old woman with the nurse issue. I heard them laugh, suggesting I was probably pretending, just desperate for attention. I stored every insult in my memory, because I knew a time would come when their words would matter. The courthouse was close. A dull gray building with a torn flag outside and an almost empty parking lot. I was escorted through a side entrance, away from the public, like something embarrassing that needed to be hidden. But inside that small courtroom I saw her, Marissa. She was seated near the front, wearing a simple navy blouse, her hands clenched tightly together. When she looked up and saw me, her eyes filled instantly. She didn't speak. She simply nodded as if saying, I promised I'd be here. Then I saw Daniel. He sat beside his attorney, polished and confident, his suit flawless, his posture practiced. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. In his mind, this was already over. The judge was a woman in her late 50s, sharp-eyed, composed, and clearly uninterested in theatrics. When she looked at me, I sensed she hadn't decided yet. That alone gave me hope. James rose to speak. He didn't raise his voice or appeal to emotion. He worked carefully, precisely like a surgeon. He presented Marissa's recording, Kristen's signed statement, and the contradictions in my medical files. Then he played the tape. Daniel's voice filled the room. Cold, deliberate, cruel. She's lonely. Easy to manipulate. That nurse is using her. Once she's declared unfit, the will goes back to how it should be. The courtroom fell silent. Daniel's lawyer attempted to object, but it was pointless. The damage was done. Those words hung in the air, contaminating everything. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly. My legs shook, but my voice remained steady. I may be old, I said, but I am not confused. I am not senile. And I am not finished. I looked straight at Daniel. I trusted you. I loved you. I forgave more than I ever should have. But when you ignored your father's call for help, when you let him die to protect yourself from accountability, you crossed a line I will never forgive. Gasps rippled through the room. Daniel's face drained of color. This isn't about money, I continued. It isn't even about the will. It's about dignity. About being seen, being heard, being treated like a human being. And if my life is worth nothing more to my own son than a dollar amount, then I will spend whatever time I have left with someone who treats me like I matter. Marissa's eyes filled with tears. She quietly reached for a tissue. The judge called for a recess. When she returned, her tone was firm and unmistakable. Mrs. Walsh is of sound mind and fully legally competent. This court finds the guardianship petition filed by Mr. Daniel Walsh to be baseless and deeply troubling. She turned toward Daniel. You should consider yourself fortunate that criminal charges are not being pursued. Just like that, it was over. I was free. Free from locked doors. Free from silence. Free from a son who had abandoned every decent part of himself. Outside the courthouse, Marissa embraced me. Not tightly, not dramatically, just enough. You did it, she whispered. No, I replied. We did. Still, I knew the fight wasn't truly finished. The law had cleared my name, but my legacy was still being shaped. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror in my real room at the facility. The same beige walls. The same small window letting in thin strips of light. The same photo of Richard and me resting on the vanity. But I was different. They had tried to break me. Daniel had tried to erase me. And yet I was still standing. Marissa arrived before breakfast with a tray of pancakes and fresh strawberries, my favorite. She didn't speak at first, just set the tray down and sat beside me. Her eyes were tired, but her smile was radiant. Victory pancakes, she said. I laughed softly. We earned them. That day, the staff treated me differently. More careful. More respectful. Some avoided my gaze. Others offered quiet apologies. I didn't seek revenge. But I didn't forget either. Daniel disappeared. No calls. No visits. Not even a message from his attorney. He faded into the background, hoping time would erase what he'd done. But I wasn't finished. That same week, I finalized the adoption with James. Marissa Carter became my daughter, legally, officially, completely. In court and in heart. When the judge asked if I was certain, I answered without hesitation. Yes. Because family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by presence. By loyalty. By who stays when everything falls apart. Daniel found out the following Monday. He sent a single-line email. You'll regret this. I deleted it. He wasn't angry about the inheritance. He was angry because I gave my love away. In the days that followed, I felt lighter. I spent time outdoors. I laughed more. I helped Marissa plan Mia's birthday, balloons, cupcakes, paper crowns. One afternoon, while folding laundry, I found an old scarf Richard had given me. I pressed it to my cheek and closed my eyes. I hope I made you proud, I whispered. Something inside me finally settled. But peace never lasts forever. One morning, James called. Daniel was contesting the will again, this time claiming undue influence. A new legal team. Another attempt to take everything back. Of course he was. A snake doesn't change. It only sheds its skin. This time, though, I was ready. We had recordings. witnesses, medical proof, legal autonomy, adoption papers. One wrong move from him would unravel everything he'd built. Still, the pain returned. No matter how strong I felt, a part of me still hurt. He was my son. Once he had been my baby. Now he was the villain of my story. That night, Marissa and I sat in the garden as the sun sank behind the trees, painting the grass gold. Mia ran through the yard chasing fireflies, her laughter floating like music. I wish I could say I don't care, I admitted quietly. But I do. Marissa squeezed my hand. You don't have to stop caring, she said. You just have to stop letting him hurt you. She was right. I would always love the little boy Daniel once was. But I would no longer grieve the man he became. I had a new chapter now, and a new family to live it with. The final confrontation arrived quietly, but I was ready. This time I intended to close the book for good. The courtroom felt colder than before. Maybe it was the heavy tension hanging in the air. Or maybe it was because I knew exactly what Daniel was attempting again. He wasn't simply challenging the will. He was trying to erase everything I had fought for. My decisions, my dignity, my truth, and the one person who had stood beside me when everyone else vanished. Marissa sat next to me at the plaintiff's table. My daughter now, legally and undeniably. Her posture was calm, but I could sense the strength beneath it, coiled and ready, like a soldier standing guard. Daniel sat across the room in yet another tailored suit, refusing to look at me. His new lawyer, polished, confident, and smug, painted a familiar picture. They claimed manipulation. They claimed coercion. They suggested Marissa had preyed on a helpless elderly woman. They leaned hard on my age, my vulnerability. What they failed to understand was simple. I was still here, still aware, still in control. When I was called to speak, I stood without hesitation. My voice did not waver. I made every decision with full understanding, I said, meeting the judge's eyes. And I stand by them. I changed my will not out of confusion, but out of clarity. I chose to leave my legacy to someone who earned it, not someone who assumed it was owed to him. The opposing attorney smirked. And your son? He asked. You believe he deserves nothing? I didn't blink. I believe he deserves exactly what he gave me in the final years of my life. Distance, silence, and disregard. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Then James stood. Calm. Precise. He presented the adoption documents, complete, unquestionable. He outlined Marissa's spotless record, her loyalty, her years of care. He reminded the court of Daniel's previous attempt to have me declared incompetent. And then, for the final time, he played the recording. Daniel's own voice echoed through the room, arrogant, calculating, describing how he planned to manipulate the system to reclaim what he believed was his. The judge leaned back, folded her arms, and sighed. I've presided over many ugly family disputes, she said. But this is calculated cruelty disguised as concern. She turned toward Daniel. Your petition is denied. Furthermore, your conduct will be referred for review. If emotional damages were awarded in this court, you would owe your mother far more than money. The tears came then not from pain but from release. It was finally over. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. We walked past them hand in hand. We didn't need to explain ourselves. We understood, and that was enough. Back at the facility, I packed my belongings for the last time. Not quietly, not fearfully, but with joy. We were moving to a small cottage just outside town. Modest, warm, ours. Marissa had already claimed it as home. Mia had chosen where her swing set would go. As I zipped my final suitcase, I glanced around the room that once felt like a prison. It was only a place now, a chapter that had served its purpose. I placed the old photo of Richard and me into my bag and whispered, I kept my promise. I didn't let him take everything. Marissa honked softly from the car. I closed the door behind me and walked away, not broken, not forgotten, but chosen. The sun warmed my face as we arrived at our new home. A small cottage with pale blue shutters, a porch swing creaking gently in the breeze. It wasn't grand, but it felt like a palace because this time I had chosen it. No one forced me here. No one controlled my steps. Mia ran ahead, laughing as she claimed her room. Daisies bloomed in the yard. I smiled. Richard would have loved this place. Daniel never reached out again. No calls. No messages. No apology. And that silence told me everything I needed to know. We unpacked slowly, savoring the life we were building. Richard's photo went on the mantel. Mia's drawings filled the walls. The kitchen came alive with the scent of cinnamon, basil, and fresh bread. I felt life return to me deeply quietly. A week later, a letter arrived. Not from Daniel, from his lawyer. Daniel had filed for bankruptcy. His reputation had collapsed after the hearings. Investors had walked away. His empire had begun to crumble. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I simply exhaled for the first time in years. Justice doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it arrives without you lifting a finger. One afternoon, Marissa and I sat on the back porch. The air smelled of grass and warm earth. She read while I crocheted something for Mia. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Giving me so much?" I looked up. "I didn't give you anything," I said. "You earned every bit of it." Her eyes filled with tears. "No one's ever told me that." I took her hand and smiled. "Then get used to it. You're stuck with me." That night I dreamed of Richard. We were dancing in the living room, slow, awkward, laughing. He wore those ridiculous plaid slippers. His hand rested on my waist, steady and warm. And for the first time in a long while, I woke up at peace. When I woke that morning, birds were singing outside the window. Sunlight spilled softly through the curtains, and somewhere down the hall I heard Mia laughing. In that moment it became clear to me this was home. Not the walls, not the furniture, not the address, but the feeling. The calm. The warmth. The love. I had found my family not through blood but through choice. Daniel had lost a fortune, but I had gained a future. And I wouldn't trade places with him for all the wealth in the world. The garden glowed in the afternoon light. Golden sun stretched across rows of freshly turned soil where Mia and I had planted wildflower seeds together. Her little hands were caked with dirt, her cheeks smudged, and her laughter, pure and unguarded, floated through the air like music. I sat on the porch swing with a glass of lemonade, watching her dash across the lawn, butterfly net in hand, chasing joy itself. Marissa stood barefoot in the grass, smiling. Her hair was tied back, sleeves rolled up, her presence calm and radiant. She looked lighter these days, as if some invisible burden had finally slipped from her shoulders. This was peace. This was healing. This was everything I had been denied, and everything I had chosen to rebuild from the fragments of my past. For so long I believed growing old meant disappearing, becoming smaller, being overlooked. I never imagined I would have to fight for my name, my dignity, my voice. But I did, and I won. Not through anger, not through revenge, but through truth, grace, and unwavering clarity. After the ruling, Daniel never reached out again. No apology, no explanation, only silence. And I let it remain. There is a quiet kind of grief in letting go of someone you once loved without limits. It doesn't scream. It doesn't rage. It simply settles, and it must be accepted. I don't hate him. I don't wish him harm. I just refuse to give him the power to define me anymore. Instead, I poured my energy into life. Into gardening. Into baking. Into teaching Mia how to make her first peach cobbler. Into helping Marissa advance her nursing certification, so she could open a small private care service from home. Slowly, we became more than a household. We became a family, one built not on blood, but on loyalty, shared struggle, and love in its truest form. Each morning I wake up and choose this life. Not because it is perfect, but because it is mine. Because I fought for it. I once believed my story ended the day Daniel placed me in that facility. I was wrong. That was only the beginning of my final act, the one I got to write myself. As the sun dipped low, I reached for a single sunflower from the pot beside the porch. My favorite. Richard once told me sunflowers always turn toward the light. I finally understand now. After the betrayal, the silence, the loneliness, I found the light again. I let it reach me, and I followed it home. Blood may have walked away, but love stayed. And in the end, love saved me. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe. And feel free to share your own story in the comments. Your voice matters.